Hello, everyone. Welcome to How Do I Teach Students at Home and at School at the Same Time. I'm Dr. Teresa Atwa, Vice President for Global Education Services, Cognia. Join me to welcome our presenters today, Meredith Lewis, Vice President of Operations and Transformation at Linkspring, and Kim Weber, Partnership Project Manager. We'd like to take this opportunity to remind you to please mute your microphone. We want you to enjoy the session, and you can type your questions in the chat box and we'll get to them at the end. Meredith?
Thank you, Dr. Atwa. Hello, everyone. So great to be with you today. As Dr. Atwa said, my name is Meredith Lewis. I am the Vice President of Operations and School Transformation at Link, which means I oversee all of the work that our transformation agents are doing in districts, schools, and states and countries all over the world. So we have been engaging with leaders and teachers as they have been embarking in this virtual learning space. We started as blended learning specialists. My background is as a principal, a teacher, a literacy coach, and I've been coaching teachers on blended and hybrid and concurrent learning for at least the last 5 years, leading schools before that. I also have firsthand experience with concurrent learning as a parent. I have a freshman in high school who started school in a remote space, and so he's been navigating this, and I've been watching the challenges that brings, and it certainly has enlightened my work as I work with educators to really think about how we support students in the virtual and in-person spaces simultaneously. I'm joined today by my amazing colleague, Kim Weber. I'm going to let her introduce herself. Kim?
Hey, thanks, Meredith. Hello, everybody. My name is Kim Weber, and I'm right now working as a partnership project manager in our trusted partnership with Cognia. And it's really an exciting endeavor that the two companies have joined together because of our alignment in our values and beliefs around providing continuous improvement opportunities for educators. So that's who I am right now. Before that, I was a blended learning coach working with Link in schools throughout the world. And before that, I was a teacher. And I just feel like I still operate and live in that space of my teacher mind and my teacher heart. So it's really exciting to be here today to talk to you about what's going on in our world right now in terms of education and how are we getting high quality learning experience to our students. So it's an honor to be here with you today. I will just jump in, and I would love it. I always forget to ask this. If you all have, as we're talking right now in the beginning, just drop in the chat, where you're from, what you teach. It's nice to see sort of who our audience is as we'll do a few different activities, interactive, but if you wanted to just go ahead and start with that. Our objective today is really to look at a high level overview of how we can use some blended learning structures and practices to address the need that you either have now or that's coming when we have students that are it's a hybrid model, or you have some students where you're actually teaching some at the same time at home and some are in the classroom. So it'll be a quick high-level overview of some of these instructional models. And I just want to really encourage you, if you're interested in diving a little deeper, you can go to the Linkspring exhibitor booth. And we have some representatives there that can talk to you a little bit more about how you could access some deeper dives into these. Okay, so we're going to put out there right away something we hold very dear at Link. We call it connection before content. So what we feel, and we believe this in our workshops and in classrooms, is that we've got to get to know each other, and we've got to have some time to build the relationships before we get into the actual learning. So I'm going to take this opportunity to use something that I found through another workshop. I was watching a coach present. I was like, this thing is fantastic. It's called Classroom Screen, and it's free. And really, it's just a dashboard you could use like I'm using right now, or you could use it live in your classroom. And It has all the bells and whistles you might need. It's got timers, it's got sound meters, it's got calendars and clocks. I'm going to use it for this activity where we can connect and learn a little bit more about each other, and using the chat in Zoom. And the idea of this activity, if you're thinking about doing it with students, is that we want to hear all students' voices. And even in this virtual place now, when we're using the chat, I know for me, even if someone asks me a question to put in the chat, I'll read other people's first. And sometimes I'll feel like, oh, I'm not going to write that now because I read someone else's. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this dice, and there's 6 questions. You're going to type your response in the chat, but you're going to hold on hitting send. And the reason for that is it gives people think time. It gives people time to formulate their answer. And then when I count down, we'll hit send or enter, and then it'll populate the chat all at once. And I'll give us a little time to just read it. And it's a real fun. I've seen kids just light up doing this too, because it's kind of fun. We all go at the same time. All right. Are there any questions? Meredith, are you popping in the chat? I think it was pretty straightforward. All right, here we go. So you roll the dice. All right, so, oh, good. We got question 3 first. So don't hit send yet or enter in the chat. Go ahead and type. If you made a film about your career and education, what would be the title? I'll give you 10 seconds to type. Okay, I'm going to count down. 3, 2, 1. Okay, go ahead and hit send or enter. Gladiator 2. I love that. Oh,
that's so creative.
Where's Prada? So take a second, just quick read through, get a good chuckle. Some of these. Down all the way.
It is
my passion.
I love that. That's creative.
It is. It is. Okay, so we'll do one more. You could see how you could do this to start a class, with students. All right. All right, let's try one more. Number 4. What do you think teaching will look like in 2041? So again, I'll give you about 15 seconds to type. Awesome. Great. So then you could take, you could see with your students, you could give them a little time, read through what their classmates wrote. So that's just a fun tool. The classroom screen, we'll drop it in the chat. And we're also going to share a Padlet with you in a little bit that'll have all these resources too. So thank you for joining us in that connection before content activity. And I will now hand it over to Meredith.
Thanks so much, Kim. So our agenda for today and the hour that we have together is to really begin by talking about what it means to rethink classrooms and classroom instruction. From there, we're going to dive into blended models and really what we've learned about blended learning that really can help us think differently about hybrid and concurrent learning and how we structure learning for students. We'll talk just a little bit at the end around tips to help engage students, because we know in the concurrent environment or hybrid environment that can be really tricky. And then we're going to leave some time at the end for questions and really to address anything that has been on your mind that we haven't talked about in the presentation. So we're going to start by really rethinking classrooms. So this presentation really came out of a blog post that I wrote called "How Do I Teach Kids at Home and at School at the Same Time?" And it really started with hearing from teachers about hybrid learning, which is where we started, where some kids were in school some days, other kids were in school, and we were sort of on an A-B schedule in some sort, which then sort of moved into what we're now calling concurrent learning, which is where some kids are at home and at school, and the teachers are teaching kids at the same time, both remotely and in the classroom. We've also seen with hybrid learning where schools might be in session and then have to go remote for a few weeks and then come back. So we've been in this really truly volatile space where we have kids learning in all different settings. And so what we really wanted to do was think about how do we rethink classrooms so that where the child is learning is not as important to how they're getting instruction, so that we can really have flexible learning spaces using what we know about blended learning to construct that environment. And that really means totally rethinking classroom instruction. Not what we've done for 100 years, where the teacher is in the front of the class, in charge of the classroom, setting up I do, we do, you do, teacher directed learning experiences, but we really think about learning differently. And that really starts with rethinking what the teacher is. The teacher being, how are we actually delivering instruction to students? Traditionally, that's been the teacher giving synchronous live instruction to students. But now we have an opportunity to really rethink where the teacher is delivering that instruction. It could be live in person. It could be live via Zoom or other platforms. It could be recorded instruction that students listen to asynchronously that is hosted in the computer. It could be assignments or digital curriculum that students are accessing in through their devices. And it could be synchronous or asynchronous opportunities for students to collaborate. Any one of those settings could provide teaching and instruction to students. So we really have to think about teaching and where it's coming from differently. That's the first thing that we want to be rethinking. Kim's going to talk a little bit about what it means to rethink student roles in the classroom.
Right. Thanks, Meredith. One of the things that in my experience teaching is when I did shift out of my traditional mode of teaching, I started teaching in 1999, was when I even before COVID, when I could see the role of the student changing as I changed my role to more of a facilitator and co-creator with my students. So now that we're in this environment of remote and hybrid learning, you really can start thinking about different jobs and roles that students have in the classroom, the virtual classroom, that are meaningful and authentic. In this space too, really thinking about them as co-creators of their learning, because there is so much more agency and time about how they do their asynchronous work and how they're working on their playlists or their assignments when they're at home. They are tech experts. And one thing when this all happened was, leverage them and use their expertise to teach the new tools that I know for me as a teacher, sometimes I would get very overwhelmed with like, oh, I really want to learn how to use a Padlet, but I don't have time. And if you just toss that over to a student and let them become the teachers of the tool, you'll accomplish a lot. And one of them is empowering them to be part of their learning experience. And then finally, this is a big one to throw at the end, but really rethinking our trust and our relationship with our students. We are very vulnerable as teachers right now, using breakout rooms and feeling like, oh, they're going to make a mistake. And we have to give ourselves and our students some trust and some grace to explore these new ways of learning and just acknowledge that they are going to make mistakes, but that's why we're here. And that's what this learning environment is about. So just some ideas to think about how you can reimagine the role of the teacher and the student.
So as we start to think about how are we looking at instruction differently, how instruction is delivered, and how are we looking at the student role in that instruction differently, we want to hear from you. What are some of the ways that you have tackled this idea of reimagining teacher and student in your own classrooms? And what questions remain in those spaces around reimagining the role of teacher and student? We're going to share a Padlet link, and we're going to take a couple of minutes to allow you to drop your comments and questions in the Padlet in the first couple of rows.
Okay.
Oh, you already did it, Kim.
I did. I know, we're fast, Meredith. And also, if you haven't used Padlet, I think you can see it on the screen right now. Is that right, Meredith?
Yes.
So this is another tool, and if you haven't used it before, again, it's got a free version. It's pretty user friendly, but sometimes there's little intuitive things. So when you are wanting to post your ideas about reimagining the role of the student or the teacher in these first two columns, you click on the plus sign, and it'll pop open this box, and then you can type in it pretty easily. That's the first one, but I always like to show everyone, I'm a huge proponent of using this in this virtual learning space. You can also pop open so many ways that students can engage with a Padlet. They can upload links, they can record their voices. So if anybody's feeling brave today and wants to click on voice, it'll open up a recording that you can do. So Feel free to play around and pop into the Padlet. The link, all access should be open. And add your thoughts about reimagining the role of the teacher and the student in these two columns.
And as people are typing, one of the things we love about Padlet is it creates an engaging interactive space for teachers and students to interact together. So there's an opportunity for us as presenters or you as educators to respond to your students in real time as they're putting notes in the Padlet and to give your thoughts on what they're sharing.
Great.
All right, so as you continue typing, and thank you so much for participating and sharing in that, we're going to talk now a little bit about the best of blended learning, right? And what we've learned from blended learning that can help us re-envision the classroom and classroom instruction. So Kim, let's talk about rethinking the classroom. So this is really the principles of blended and personalized learning. Really get down to the fact that we have a finite amount of time with students, but in that time, we can really help control the time, pace, path, and place of how learning is delivered. So when does the learning happen? At what pace do students complete assignments? Do they go in order, or can we move the order of assignments around and give some more choice to students? And where does that learning take place? So when we're thinking about concurrent instruction or hybrid instruction or whatever your setting is, what we're really thinking about is how do we leverage time, pace, path, and place to make place less relevant to the kind of learning that we deliver? So we're going to dive into that really through the idea of blended models. So blended models are really designed to help us organize ourselves around path, place, time, and pace, right? They're really there to help give some structure to those four elements in ways that that allow you to sort of shift from a more traditional classroom into a more and more blended and personalized student-centered learning space. So this next section, we're going to really dive into three of the models: flipped, station rotation, and playlists that get us into a more and more personalized, more and more time, pace, path, place space for instruction to happen. And we're going to start by talking about flipped classroom. So in a flipped classroom, we're really thinking about flipping instruction and application of learning. In a traditional classroom, the teacher delivers instruction for a portion of the classroom, usually in person and directly. And then oftentimes, once that learning is absorbed, students go off to do the application of the learning on their own, sometimes at home, sometimes in a one-on-one assignment that they're doing in their classroom. Flipped learning is about switching that model, where students get the information through an article, a video, a teacher-recorded screencast on their own time before instruction, and the time with the teacher is really spent unpacking the learning and the application of that learning. So when we think about concurrent instruction, right? So we're in a space now where we have some kids at home, some kids at school. In a flipped model of concurrent instruction, the teacher can actually meet with students who are at home while students in the classroom are doing a flipped activity, and then switch it so that students at home are doing that flipped activity while they meet with students in the school, right, in person. So you could actually have recorded instruction that students in the classroom in person are viewing on their devices while you're meeting with students on Zoom. And then you can give the students on Zoom the next things that they need to do off camera while you switch back to the students who are in class and actually unpack the article they read or the video they watched in person. So it allows the teacher to sort of be in two places at one time in some way, simply by how we're directing the instruction that happens. So a few tips around flipped instruction are really to create context. So ensuring that the importance of the flipped learning, that we're actually going to use it for something, is communicated to students, that there's an opportunity for them to flip and learn in a way that could be online, or it could be an article or something that they access, and that there's an actual follow-up activity with the teacher, an offline activity, application of the learning that students know is coming. So there's a purpose to actually getting them to complete and do the flipped piece of the instruction. One way to set up something like this is through bookended learning, and we put some examples of this on the platform. But a bookend video is where in a pre-recorded video, the teacher actually gives directions to the students, shows a video, and gives an activity all through a screencast. And if you want to learn more about that, specifically, we put some links that can really help think about how we deliver flipped instruction in a way that gives kids a lot of structure and direction to help guide the learning. Thanks for showing where that is, Kim.
Sure.
So the flipped classroom is really just one group at home, one group at school, flipping back and forth. The next model that gets even a little more personalized is station rotation. So in a station rotation model, we're really thinking about not just breaking the class up into two groups, one at home, one at school, but really leveraging all of those different teacher roles that we talked about earlier in different spaces. So there are a series of activities that kids would go through that are with the teacher and with the other forms of instruction that we mentioned earlier. So in this particular example, and this might be good for younger students, we have a small group with the teacher. We have offline work that students might be doing. We have student interaction or a small group instruction, and we have online work. So we really organize 4 different learning opportunities for students, and we move students in groups through those 4 different learning activities. And those activities allow us to interact in an online space or an in-person space, not with 30 kids now, but with 6 or 7, right? We get into a space where we can have a much more meaningful interaction, even online with students, and still have students doing purposeful work in other spaces at other times of the instructional space. These activities can range from 15 minutes to 30 minutes, depending on how much time you need. Here's an example, a concrete example of what this looks like for younger students who many of our teachers we're hearing from in the K2 space are like, how do I do hybrid and concurrent learning for little kids? Well, here's an example of how that could work. You could set up a small group instruction, could be a guided reading group or a small reading group via Zoom or in person, and that could vary depending on student location. There could be a read to self component where students are actually in a physical book, reading offline for a set period of time and writing a response of some sort. There can be an opportunity for kids to interact in a read aloud or a flip grid, which could be facilitated by a paraprofessional or something that you pre-recorded that students would watch as a read aloud and respond to. And then there could be a digital curriculum that we work in, like Starfall. There's a lot of free phonics programs, computer programs where students can work on some of their reading skills specifically leveled to their needs. So students could move around in this space, and the teacher would really be meeting alternately with in-person and online students in small groups at scheduled times based on this rotation schedule.
Meredith, I'll just pop in here too, because when we were talking about rethinking the student, this is a perfect place to start thinking the roles that students can play to take a little more ownership in these station rotations. Like there might be a Padlet where students are posting the responses, and then there's a student whose job it is to respond and monitor that Padlet chat that's happening. So again, getting at the meaningful roles students can play and help these station rotations go smoothly.
There's also a space in here where you could really play around with doing at home and in person simultaneously. So if you have a para or a second teacher or even a small group of students that can meet together in like a Google Meets or a Zoom, you could have kids from the in-person classroom and from the at-home classroom actually join together to talk about a book or to read something together in one of those small groups, which would really allow you to build more community among your at-home and your in-person students, which would really help those students who are remote feel connected and stay connected to some of their peers that they don't actually get to see.
So true.
Here's another virtual station rotation planner, just as an example of what this could look like. I showed you a sort of a very simple 4-group. Here's a 3-group example. You can really play with what that looks like, but it really is about finding those different instructional spaces and building time for students to move between those spaces, and also about getting teacher instruction away from 30 people online with very little interaction to small groups of 6 or 7 students where you can get some meaningful interaction with students and actually hear from kids. And as a parent who has a student learning remotely, one of the things he tells me every day is, I didn't get to talk to anybody, or I did. Right? And it matters to him if he actually gets to unmic and say something or interact with somebody in a meaningful way. And that's still very scary for a 14-year-old. So I'm sure it feels scary for a lot of kids. And the smaller we can get those groups, the easier it's going to be for our kids to unmic and have meaningful conversations. So I'm going to pause for a quick second. Are there any questions about flipped classroom, station rotation, and how we might leverage those in a concurrent classroom? Feel free to drop questions in the chat or unmic and ask those questions before we go into playlists, which is a slightly more complicated model, but one that might be even easier to use in a concurrent classroom. So let's first start with flipped and station. Any questions?
I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Thanks, Sophia.
Gotten really good at in Zoom presentations is a nice long wait time. And I share this intentionally because it takes a while to like find your unmute, type your question in. And a lot of times the in-person wait times, which already are a little short, carry over into Zoom and just aren't enough time. So it looks like we don't have any specific questions coming up yet. Yes, are there some classes in LinkSpring on flipped learning? That's a great question, and thank you for asking. So LinkSpring is our online professional learning platform. It's a blended virtual coaching platform for adult learners. And we do have some learning modules specifically on flipped learning. We also have learning modules on station rotation. And so if you have questions about LinkSpring as a professional development tool, we definitely can stick around at the end of the presentation and answer questions or share our contact information for that. But thank you for asking that. All right, so let's talk playlists. So the playlist model is the most personalized way to deliver instruction because it allows you to really create differentiated and personalized playlists to assign to students. Playlists can look the same for every student, or playlists can be differentiated to meet the needs of any particular students in your classroom. Playlists can be highly complicated and very simple, depending on how you set them up. But essentially what a playlist is an opportunity for you to lay out up front a series of instructional activities that students will do, sometimes in sequence, sometimes with choice around the sequence or the activities. And students will move through that playlist at their own pace. Playlists are usually a combination of teacher time, individual work time, and collaborative time. What we don't want playlists to be is a rundown of assignment that kids do all by themselves. What we really want playlists to be is a collection of different types of activities similar to a station rotation. So what we saw with those 4 activities in the station rotation, those could be laid out in a playlist where students actually move through those at their own pace. So this.
Oh, sorry, Meredith.
Yeah.
wanted to share one of my pitfalls as a teacher, because I started doing these playlists, and I had a nice big checklist of to-dos, and I forgot to put in the parts you mentioned, the collaboration, the creativity, and I thought I was doing such a great job. I'm like, look here, y'all, do these at whatever pace you want, but they were uninspired by my just list of tasks to do. So really incorporating the collaboration, the creativity within a playlist, you'll get much more engagement.
Yeah, actually, can you go back to that previous one, Kim? Sure. Yeah, so this is a playlist I made for young students, so kids in kindergarten. And it really is a sequence of activities that students go through. But in this case, you can see that they're not reading based, right? Kids can see the icon, and in seeing the icon, they know kind of where they're headed or what tool they're going to be using. So that first one was a link to an IXL, right, which is an online digital curriculum. So students would have these laid out, and they could click on each one of those. And in those, when they clicked on them, there would be some audio directions from the teacher or video directions from the teacher that they could watch and then follow. So this would be a series of activities. You notice there is a meet with the teacher time, and then everything else is activities that students can do individually. But there is some interactive components like a flip grid where students would record a video and other students could watch their video and respond to them, and they could go back in and see that response. So Jamboard is the last one there, and that's another Google tool that allows students to post creatively and to respond to each other's posts. So there's an opportunity there for a mix of interactive activities and online activities and in-person activities that students could go through. And again, you could do any one of these activities in person or at home, so it's not dependent on place, right? So that's what we're trying to get to, is where it's not dependent on place, and where students have some control and some meaningful interactions with one another and with the teacher. This next playlist is another example, and I know it's a little bit hard to read because it's small here, but it is linked on the Padlet under playlists. This is Catlin Tucker's argumentative essay playlist. But again, you'll see a series of things that students are doing. Watch this, analyze this, read this. You'll also see that there's a teacher time at the bottom with a big stop sign. Mm-hmm. I like to point out that a playlist like this could be constructed for the whole class, but that teacher time could be moved for individual students. So some students might do activity 1, teacher time, activity 2 and 3, teacher time. And it's just as simple as adding a line and dropping in a teacher time. That's one way to keep a flow of a playlist, but to personalize it for the needs of individual students. So if you have students that need lots and lots of check-ins, they get lots and lots of check-ins. And if you have students that can do 5 activities or 5 different sequences and then check in with the teacher, they can do that as well. So it allows some degree of personalization. And again, each of these activities can be done at home or at school. So it doesn't matter what your location is. The instructional components are the same, and you access the teacher either online or in the classroom, depending on when you've scheduled that appointment.
Great. Yeah, I'll jump in here too, because after I had my first playlist fail, I jumped over and I got a hold of this and I used this. And this is actually, this one is like, rather than like a daily or weekly playlist, it's a unit. So you're writing a persuasive essay. And so you can structure a playlist to cover a unit from beginning to end. And then where I got a lot of benefits from this too is up in the notes section. So even in between times when I wasn't meeting with them, I could monitor here. It's a live doc, and I could see, I would have the students write notes or questions, and I could just pop into each student's playlist doc and get a quick feel for where they're at and how they're progressing through the playlist. So,
and I'll take a minute in the playlist conversation here to also point out one of the things that I've seen most frequently in concurrent instruction is a teacher teaching traditionally via Zoom or Google Meets, where all the kids would log in, whether they're at school or at home. They would all log into the same screen. The teacher would teach to the screen and to the kids at home, but also to the screen at the same time. And then there'd be an assignment that follows up that kids work on, right? That kind of a structure is an easy switch, but from a student perspective, the student's experience in that is watch a screen, do some work. Then the next class, watch a screen, do some work. And that is not engaging. There's no personal connection. It requires the student to have a lot of agency in unmuting and asking questions in a setting where they're not really very engaged. And we're seeing that a lot of kids are just turning off their cameras and sitting back and just waiting for the assignment to come so they can just do it and be done. So what we're really looking at here in like a playlist structure or a station rotation structure is an alternative to that kind of action that gives students more control over the assignments, more opportunity to interact in meaningful ways, and it gives the teacher a lot of flexibility. When students are working on a playlist, the teacher can actually structure their time in any way that fits the needs of their students. They could meet with the same small group of students at the beginning of class every single day because those small group of students need that check-in. And those could be online students or in-person students. They could then meet with small groups throughout the rest of the period, depending on where students are at within their playlist, and come back to that first group at the end of the period and meet with them again to say, did you do this? How'd you do? The teacher has a lot of flexibility in a playlist structure because all of the instructional components are laid out and designed for students to do without the direct teacher instructions having to come from the teacher first. So that's my plug for a playlist. Here's another example. This is a gamified playlist where students move around a game board and there's different interactive components that they click on. And each of the inner parts of the playlist are assignments that students are working on that all of those outer pieces connect to. So this is another way to sort of organize a playlist in more of a gamified space. And then I think the last, and here's one more example. This one reads like a list of assignments, but those assignments could actually be much more interactive. And each of these sort of checkboxes could connect back with a Google Classroom link or could be hyperlinked to the assignment that students are completing. So one other thing about playlists, I know not all students are ready to just dive straight into a playlist with that level of agency and responsibility that comes with it. So one way to ease into a playlist or to start using playlists with younger students is similar to how we might have used like choice boards with students once upon a time in classrooms, where we actually start with a whole class meeting on Zoom, where we give some direction of what's going to happen. And then we have kids either turn off cameras or go off into their playlist work. And during that playlist work, the teacher, those little small pink circles, the teacher is actually meeting with small groups while the rest of the students are working on their playlist activities. And then we might come back together as a whole class to check in. How's it going? How much did we get done? Do you know what you're working on next? Where you're going next in your playlist? Do you need to be in a breakout group with some other students, or are you ready to work one-on-one? We can set the context and then go back into another playlist work session where students are working on their playlist and the teacher is meeting with individuals or small groups. And then we could come back together again, either as a whole class or maybe even in student discussion groups. But there's a way for us to kind of ebb and flow between playlists and meeting time in order to keep that connection with our students during the use of a playlist. It doesn't have to be all one or all the other. This is really thinking more flexibly about how we can organize our time, pace, path, and place.
Okay. So we wanted to use this opportunity again to get some shared and collective wisdom out there, because we always believe in that too, that in the room with a bunch of educators, there's a lot of ideas to share. So in the Padlet, again, we dropped 3 more columns. Okay, is it 3? I got my windows all in the way here. Share your ideas for flipped learning, share your ideas for station rotation, and share your ideas for creating playlists and using them. So if you've had some experience trying out some of these models already and want to just post some ideas to share with the group, please take a minute to do that.
Also, if questions are coming up for you around like, how do I get into this structure? How do I introduce this to students? Or, I tried this and this happened. What do you suggest we do next? Anything from your experience, questions that are coming up, drop them in the chat. We're going to have a little time to talk a little bit more and answer those questions for you. Okay, so these are our quick tips around what we can do to better engage students in the concurrent hybrid remote learning space. So the first thing you saw us do it at the very beginning is connection before content. Kids need opportunity to talk and not necessarily in answer to instructional questions. Kids also just need to talk, like, how you doing? What are you doing at home? What am I doing at home? They want to connect with their peers. They want to connect with their teachers. They want opportunities to talk about themselves, and we need to provide a space for that to happen, even if students are remote. They aren't getting that kind of connection that they need, and it's impacting mental health of our students. So really thinking about how do we build in more and more opportunities to connect around anything and around things that are going to get kids talking and sharing. The second piece is teach the tech. And that really is, we use the station rotation model as a way to introduce technology to students through the teacher station. So the first time a student uses Flipgrid shouldn't be all by themselves in a tutorial that I shared on Google Classroom. The first time we use Flipgrid should be with the teacher, right? Where the teacher is showing, here's what I did, and here's how you do it, and you try it, and I try it. And we do it together so that students understand how it works before they have to go use it in a independent station rotation or in a playlist later on. So really taking the time to teach the tech up front ensures that when students see that component come up in their playlist, they're going to be okay with it. The other quick tip I would say around teaching the tech is hit record on your computer or your Zoom while you're teaching kids how to use the tech, because then you have a screencast video that you didn't even have to plan for, that they can come back to and use over and over. You also have a screencast video that you can send to parents. So if you, again, teach young students, while you're showing kids how to do this, if you record it, then they can watch it later, their parents can watch it later, and that tutorial lives somewhere where it can be referenced. The third piece I mentioned, the small groups and one-to-one, are key to actually getting interaction with students and understanding what they understand and what they don't, where they're struggling and where they're feeling good. And that can help you plan much more intentional instruction for students as you plan out small groups. So really thinking about getting away from 30 kids all at once via Zoom and get into a space where we're actually able to interact more personally. Voice and video recordings are a much easier way to give directions to students and a much more engaging way to give directions to students than written directions. So really think about, you only need one good voice recorder, one good video recorder to be able to use audio and video recordings, both in giving directions and in giving feedback to students. So really think about that as how can you leverage those platforms. Voice and video recordings also let students go back to things over and over and over and over again, as many times as they need to really understand what needs to be done. And then our fifth and probably most important one is this is hard. This is really hard. It's really frustrating. It's emotionally draining for us, for our students. So think about that and really, factor that in. We're not going to get it right every single time. We're going to need to come back to things and redo them sometimes. And so are our students. So this is a time to really recognize that and to acknowledge that in the work with your students and with yourselves.
I gotta go back one to Meredith. The leverage voice and video recordings goes both ways. So if you can allow even, sometimes I'm like, oh, I feel like I should work for Padlet, but again, allowing students to respond in this space of using a video recording or a voice recording, it increases their engagement. I get a hoot out of watching students post on Padlet their responses. So it opens up. There's so much typing right now in remote learning, and everybody's writing their responses and typing in the chats, and so giving them that tool as well to use their voice in their responses.